The only drop we have for me in the open is you talking about mailing dirty drawers to myself.
Yeah, which I still,
which really loses the context of that conversation.
Saying what you doing, yo.
There was a lot more to it. It's a longer story.
It was a longer story, but the bottom line is still drawers that were dirty were in a box mailed home instead of just, remember I tried to put you on game? I tried to teach you go into the bathroom, just wash them out in your sink.
Hold on. No, see, now that sounds so much worse.
Wow. Why?
You're making it sound like they're dirty. These are just worn.
Well, what's the difference?
They've been. Well, you're saying wash them out?
Yeah.
All right. We do not. We're not going to go down this road. All I'm saying is, out of context, Tom, don't mail dirty drawers to yourself is a little unfair. It's a little
because if they didn't know the backstory, they might be like, "Well, what are they talking
Correct.
About?
Yes. I'm on a trip right now, and I brought plenty of everything.
Extra draws?
To get through. I brought the sufficient number of them. I don't need to send a package back that my wife will open. Let's just make that clear.
All I'm saying is, when I used to produce and we lived on the road for weeks at a time, you did what you had to do to make sure that everything was washed and fresh. Is all I'm saying.
We can revisit that discussion a little later. Andy McCullough is currently with us and wondering what the hell is happening in the couple of minutes before we get to him. Senior MLB writer. You look like you got a question, Andy. Anything you want to know here before we move on?
Was there not a Target or a Walmart?
Well, exactly.
So, how did you get in a position in life as a grown man where you had no access to just a new pair of underpants?
So you in spring training, I imagine you go on an extended trip, right, to Florida and or Arizona. So yes. I do the same thing for the first couple of weeks of training camp. The issue is not that I don't pack enough. It's that I choose to travel only with one carry-on bag, which is stuffed to the absolute brim when I leave. And then rather than be moving things into a laundry bag, which never quite fits back in well enough, I get a few days into the trip and I mail a box of laundry, go to FedEx, box up the laundry, and send it back. I don't think
that's crazy. That's crazy. Yeah, no, look, I'm all for guys sort of, forging their own solutions. I loved the book Hatchet when I was a kid, but that's psychotic behavior, I would say.
Well, what's the strangest thing you do on spring training? Like the thing that is the least like your normal life when you go to spring training?
Oh, I mean, I'm so bad about booking flights and things like that. There's multiple text chains with other writers about I've been doing this for 15 years and I still don't know how to travel. I once flew from Los Angeles to Monterrey, Mexico through Detroit. I once took like 4 flights to get from, I think, Chicago to DC. I'm just very bad at booking travel. I always book flights at 6 a.m. I've booked flights where I was in Houston and had to go to Atlanta, but I had bought a flight that sent me from Atlanta to Houston, which I didn't realize until I was, at TSA. So I'm an incompetent man to begin with. I just try and keep it incompetent in a way that does not get me committed, if that makes sense. You know what I'm saying?
That does make sense. I actually feel like I'm pretty put together from a travel thing. I've got a formatted email that I send and make sure everything is set up. What you can't predict is last summer when I was out here, and then I remember when all the communication for everything went down on flights, and then I ended up driving, after hosting this show, I live in Minneapolis, I ended up driving from Salt Lake City to Minneapolis, which you don't have to Google. Nice. It's about 29 hours on that drive. Stayed at a nice American in Chamberlain, South Dakota.
There you go.
We all need a couple of war stories here and there. What is the biggest story? We're 2 weeks into the baseball season. Biggest story in baseball that does not involve torpedo bats.
Oh man, I was gonna say that the Milwaukee Brewers should get a tip from all the bat companies for the millions of dollars they've been made by having a terrible series against the Yankees to start the year, because every hitter now wants one of these freaking bats. That's a good question. What is the biggest story? It's fairly early still, as that's a pretty revelatory statement. I think that sort of the Dodgers' pursuit of a dynasty is going to be something that's fascinating to track as the year goes along. I think there's a lot of competitive division races. The Atlanta Braves getting off to such a sluggish start. While I don't think it's going to have like long-term consequences in terms of them missing the postseason, I think they should be fine. It does put a real crimp in their sort of championship potential and like winning the division in a competitive NL East. I think the AL East should be fun. So it's kind of hard for me because like I try not to assign too much meaning to anything that happens really in the first month or so of the season. Like I like to say like all of these games count, but they don't really matter per se. All that matters is kind of like injuries and things like that. So yeah, the torpedo bats are the biggest story, that even though they've kind of petered out. And I think the Yankees scored like 6 runs this week against the Tigers. And so maybe it wasn't just the bats. Maybe the Brewers just had a terrible weekend.
Oh, and from what I understand, too, the Yankees were integrating these last year. Just nobody noticed that they were doing it. And so then it became this massive thing. It's not like this is, I mean, rocket science actually would have solved this quite a while ago. I was going to say it's not rocket science. It's like, hey, should we have the bat be better at the part they hit it on? No. Let's keep it at that other part that if it hits that, it just kind of makes a weird sound and wobbles down the first baseline. Like that was just how it was for like 150 years.
It's like every innovation in sports that as soon as it happens, you're like, well, yeah, 3 points are worth more than 2. Like you should take more of those. You're like, well, if you hit the ball over the fence, that's better than trying to bunt, or like if you've played Madden, going for it on 4th and 2 will drive your friend crazy. He wants you to punt there. So yeah, but I do think it is an interesting sort of innovation. It's something that a lot of hitters have been sort of clamoring for. They feel like they're losing the technology war to pitchers. Pitchers have a lot of ways of like sort of shaping their individual offerings and things like that, and so hitters are viewing it as a way to maybe even the playing field in some ways. And I think for some guys, players who make consistent contact in a certain part of the bat that maybe might not be the barrel, it could have a real positive effect. But is it going to revolutionize the sport? No, it's not.
You mentioned the Braves and the slow start. Again, we don't want to make a lot out of a small sample size. But what's the level of concern, if any, about the start the Braves are off to?
Yeah, it's troubling. Like I said, I don't think it's going to wreck their season. I think teams go through bad stretches, but it is more of a sort of narrative problem when it happens at the beginning of the year as compared to like a random week in June. The injury to Ronaldo Lopez is a real problem for their starting rotation. Jurickson Profar getting suspended. He was kind of their big offseason addition, to sort of bolster the lineup. They're really hoping that Ronald Acuna, the former MVP outfielder, and Spencer Strider, their former, all-star starter, when they come back from injury, that those guys will be able to sort of buoy the club. And I think the players both will be effective and good, but coming off injury, it's just hard to pencil in Acuna as being this like 7-win superstar that he was, before he tore his ACL, or for Strider's case, coming off of an internal brace operation on his elbow, that he's going to be like a number 1 starter right away. He looks good facing minor league hitters. He should be fine. They both should be effective, but it's hard to say like, oh, they'll just be the guys they had been. So still a good club, still a lot of talent, but they're in a very competitive division and they're scuffling to start the year.
When you look at the Pirates and the start they're off to, obviously they've got one of the bright young players in the entire game in Paul Skenes. In your mind, did they do enough to build that thing around a dynamic type of a talent at this stage in his career?
Well, no, but I don't even know that they ever said they were going to try to do that right now. I mean, their pitch to their fans is that their farm system, is going to produce guys who they can pair with Skenes in the coming years. And we'll see how it goes. Sometimes those sort of gambits do work. I think the Baltimore Orioles have done an excellent job, building up their farm system and getting to a place where they're in contention. The Pirates very clearly are not interested in significant expenditures. And so you could make an argument that when you have a player as good as Paul Skenes, when he's healthy right now, your window is right now. You could create a team around him that no one wants to play in a short season in the postseason, because you'd have to see, or short series in the postseason, because you're facing Paul Skenes likely twice. In a 5-game series. So, but yeah, like I think there's a lot of teams who are sort of not being aggressive on free agents. And, that's nothing new. It's something that, close to a majority of the sport has been doing for several years. When you talk to these executives, in individual contexts, they all, will say sort of what we all know is that free agent spending is an inefficient way to build a team, right? Like we know that giving long-term deals to guys on the backside of their careers, by the time they get to free agency, those things often don't work out. But you look up in the postseason and who's there. It's usually the teams who give out those sort of contracts and are willing to take on the risks. And so, like inside within context, it makes sense for the individual moves, but it's just a tough thing to sell to your fans over and over and over again. It's not just Pittsburgh who's doing this.
Well, and that's what I was driving at with a rather ineloquently phrased question there, which is it almost reminds me of in the NFL now when teams have started looking at this as, okay, it used to be you have the veteran quarterback. Now you're in your championship window. Now it's, hey, you got a guy who's cost controlled for 3, 4, 5 years. We can spend all this additional money and try to win right now. I know baseball's different. The roster size are different. The inherent one-on-one nature of the game. But you just said it. I mean, this may be the best opportunity that you have, especially as a smaller market team that is going to be challenged as you get further down the road to lock up a player long term. Just the economics of the game would seem to indicate if you have something you can build around in a market like Pittsburgh, you may have to take your shot, or otherwise you're selling something that is going to be expired by the time you actually get there.
Yeah, well, you're also banking on everything working out with Skenes from a health perspective, and this is not like there's no inside info to suggest that as a pitcher, he is at risk for injury every time he picks up a baseball. It doesn't matter that he's this, 6'6" monster who, looks like built in a lab to do this. Like, he's a pitcher and pitchers get hurt. We know this about all of them. And so, yeah, it's basically banking that, like, if everything goes right with this guy, everything else will go right to catch up with him. And we don't have to make sort of major, financial gambles, as their owner would probably view it, in order to do it. And so I think it's a tough look for the sport when you have certain teams, the Dodgers and the Mets, who are clearly just funneling millions upon millions, to build these potential super teams. You have other clubs, like Philadelphia has done that in years past, and they're kind of, set. San Diego has been really aggressive in spending. And then you have, the other clubs, the Clevelands and the Milwaukees and the Pittsburghs and Cincinnati. You can go on and on and on. They're mostly in the Central, who are just kind of hanging out and, hoping things break right and hoping to win 86 to 88 games, get into the postseason and do some damage there, and it's like, I get it. It makes sense from a sort of game theory or, probabilistic standpoint, but it's a tough sell to your fans when you see other franchises being so aggressive and trying to add talent.
I live in Minnesota. Everybody I know is a Twins fan.
Sure.
And
another great example.
A lot of people there actively are rooting for that team to lose and the poll ads to sell, because all of a sudden you start hearing that the books indicate that they're millions and millions in debt somehow, while simultaneously not actually spending on the baseball team. You have pieces there, but if you don't do really anything to buoy yourself and make a big move, you're right, it's hard, and it's indicated by how few fans are in the stands in some of those stadiums.
For sure, yeah, and folks who are in the smaller markets will point to the revenue disparity of the amount of money that they're taking in versus what teams like the Dodgers or the Yankees are doing. The Dodgers with Shohei Ohtani have created this sort of money machine that sort of pays for itself. I mean, every 15 minutes they announce a new sponsor. They have like an official beef jerky now of the Dodgers. It's crazy how much money is coming in there, and these other clubs don't have access to that because they don't have Ohtani. And so, the thing though is that they also have access often to revenue sharing, to ways from the general pool of funds to sort of stay afloat. But there are more clubs who are dealing with debt, as the Twins are. They're looking to explore a sale, especially with the threat of a lockout coming down the road. I think there's going to maybe be more of an impetus on some of these clubs who are half in, half out on whether or not they want to maintain ownership to try and do it before a lockout potentially comes in and causes some problems. So yeah, I just feel like there are a lot of franchises that are very stagnant, and that is creating a lane for the teams that are interested in spending now to really make some hay.
Last thing for you, Andy, and really this is just a question for me and you. So for anybody who's tempted to not keep listening, we are going to get back to the NFL draft. We'll have Todd McShay later. Don't worry. There's a lot more sports coming. But who is the greatest early 2000s emo band and why?
Oof, man, that is a tough one.
What kind of question is that?
That is a tough one. I will say that these guys would be very mad if I described them as emo. But I feel like the one that has had the best longevity from that era is Thrice.
That is an off-book answer. I thought you were going to something slightly more mainstream than that, but Thrice is a good band. Very solid.
I would say Thrice, and if I hear from Riley Breckenridge, their drummer, they will be very irritated to be described as emo. But of that sort of post-hardcore, emotional hardcore genre, I would say Thrice has had the best career.
The only guest that I can ask that question to, and he had a very well thought out answer on the spot. Andy, thanks a ton for being here, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. This was fun.
Catch the Rich Eisen Show live weekdays from 12 to 3 p.m. Eastern on Roku Sports Channel in the U.S.